Hello, and welcome back to the channel. My name is Ricky Fraley, and today I'll be going over the case of a man named Tim McLean. Now, Timothy Richard McLean was a hard-working, athletic young man who worked as a carnival barker. A carnival barker, you may know as someone who attracts people to carnivals and other public shows that are just out in the public. They'll just be out there talking about the event, hyping people up, and getting them to go to the event. Now, he enjoyed this job because it afforded him some freedom that he didn't have in other previous jobs that he had held before. He hated the monotony of those other jobs, and he loved meeting new and interesting people each night through his job. He's described as having enjoyed listening to music, and he loved his pet iguana that he had named Little Timmy. Now, I'm going to go through a little bit of a timeline here on this case, as always. This timeline, however, will be covering two people. That is Timothy and another man by the name of Vincent Lee. I'm using the name that he adopted when he moved to Canada because I'm not going to try to pronounce his other name. His other last name was Chinese, and I don't speak Chinese. So, or Mandarin or Cantonese, whichever dialect it was. I know there's more than one. So, it starts in 1968. Vince Lee was born on April 30th, 1968 in Dadong, China. Not much is known of his upbringing, or of his family, or his overall childhood in China. In 1985, Timothy Richard Tim McLean Jr. was born on October 3rd in that year, 1985. He was born in Victoria, which is in British Columbia, Canada, to loving parents Carol Dedeli and Tim McLean Sr., obviously. He grew up in both Winnipeg and Ely in Manitoba, which is in Canada. In 1992, Vince graduated from the Wuhan Institute of Technology, with a bachelor's degree in computing. Between 1994 and 1998, Vince then worked as a computer software engineer in Beijing, in China. So he was a pretty smart dude. 2001, Vince immigrated to Winnipeg, Canada on June 11th of 2001. He began working on a series of menial jobs here and there after failing to find any in his career study. He couldn't find a job as a computer programmer once he moved to Canada. 2003-2004, a psychiatrist named Stanley Yaren said that Lee was hospitalized after an incident that he had with Ontario Provincial Police. He worked for 6 months at Grant Memorial Church in order to support his wife. The pastor of the church, a man by the name of Tom Castor, recalled that Lee seemed happy to be working and to have a job, despite often becoming frustrated with the language barrier that existed between him and the other people that were there. So in 2005, in the spring of that year, he quit his job at the church and began working as a forklift operator, while his wife took work as a waitress. Vince then officially became a Canadian citizen on November 7th of the following year, 2006, upon which he moved to Edmonton, leaving his wife in Winnipeg until she could eventually join him. Then, in 2008, Lee would start work at as a newspaper delivery man. He worked at a fast food restaurant and also at Walmart. 4 weeks before the incident that this video is about, he would be fired from his job at Walmart for an alleged disagreement with other employees. It is reported that he asked for time off from his newspaper delivery job to attend a job interview in Winnipeg. It's shortly after this that he would eventually board a Greyhound bus to Winnipeg, and that is where he met Tim McLean. Now, it's important to note that Tim McLean was only on this Greyhound bus as he was traveling for work. He was following the carnival for which he was a barker. So if he had a different job, he would not have been on this bus at this time. Alright, so now we've reached the year that this incident happened in, which is 2008. We're going to zoom in on the days leading up to the incident. So, on July 28th, 2008, at 12:05 p.m., so midday, Vince would board a Greyhound bus in Edmonton, headed for Winnipeg. The following day, July 29th, Lee would get off the bus at Erickson in Manitoba with several pieces of luggage and would stay the rest of the night on a beach next to a grocery store. Eyewitnesses would say Vince sat on that beach silent, upright, and devoid of emotion, with a sign in front of his luggage. That must have been quite odd to see, a man just sitting on a beach, devoid of emotion, just completely slate face, blank, just staring off into the distance, with all of his luggage with him. He was obviously waiting for something, but he had a sign in front of his luggage. The sign read, "Laptop for sale, $600 OBO," which OBO means or best offer, if you don't know. It meant that he just wanted to get rid of the laptop. He thought that a good price was 600 US, or Canadian, sorry, I'm stupid, 600 Canadian dollars, or best offer. So if you didn't have 600, you didn't feel like paying 600, he would give it to you for a better offer if that was the best offer he had gotten. He sat there with that sign, upright, devoid of emotion, the entire night with his eyes wide open, which I'm sure would have been very, very freaky for anybody who saw him as they were making their way past. So, the next morning, he would end up selling the laptop to a 15-year-old boy for only $60. So there's that or best offer coming out there. He wanted to sell it for $600. Ended up selling it for only $60, with 10% of the amount, which is kind of odd. But to continue, actually, an important note before going forward is that throughout the years, Vince had been having very deeply disturbing thoughts about aliens, and his role, he believed, was chosen by God. His role as chosen by God was to destroy these aliens. So he was having some kind of break from reality in his mind. This was actually, however, understood to be a symptom of his schizophrenia, which he had been diagnosed with earlier, and he refused to take any medication for. So he had been diagnosed professionally, clinically, one of the two, or both, with schizophrenia, and this manifested in him believing that there were aliens here on Earth that were trying to, I believe they said, they were trying to destroy the Earth, and that he was chosen by God to destroy the aliens before they could. So, fast forward. On July 30th at 12 p.m., so noon again on the 30th of July, 2008, a 22-year-old Tim McLean boarded the 1170 Greyhound bus at Edmonton in Alberta, Canada, bound for Winnipeg as well. This route was going down the Yellowhead Highway through Saskatchewan. Tim was on his way home to Manitoba and chose to sit at the back of the bus by himself, directly one row in front of the toilets. So if you don't know, on Greyhound buses or other buses where people are going to be on for long stretches of time without stops in between for bathroom breaks, there are a set of bathrooms at the back of the bus. So Tim came and sat in one of the very last rows. He was a very pleasant man, and he exchanged pleasantries with the others on the bus before he got to his seat. He sat down and put on his headphones to listen to some music and fall asleep. You know, very normal thing to do on a long bus ride or a plane ride where you're just being transported, you're not doing the transportation yourself. He sat there, put on his headphones, and went to sleep. So later that day, at around 6:55 p.m., Vincent, who was described as a tall man, around 6 feet tall, of Chinese descent, boarded the bus and sat at the very front, looking agitated, but normal in all other regards. After 30 minutes, during a rest stop, Vince left the bus to go smoke some cigarettes. By this point, witnesses said he grew far more agitated in appearance, and he had changed seats once he reboarded. opting instead to go sit next to Tim towards the rear of the bus. So after he got off the bus to go smoke cigarettes, and when he came back on the bus, he went past the seat that he was sitting in the front and went and sat directly beside Tim McLean in the back of the bus, in front of the restrooms. Tim would acknowledge the man with a smile and a hand gesture, and then would go back to leaning his head on the window and listening to his music and attempt to fall back to sleep after the rest stop. To the other passengers, Vince seemed perfectly normal, however, placing the bag that he had in the overhead compartment for storage, and taking his seat next to Tim. So, as he sat there, other passengers they recall hearing Vince chanting in Chinese, like, again, whether Mandarin, Cantonese, or whichever one it was. He was chanting in a Chinese dialect, in a very low and deep, but almost hushed tone, for the first few minutes after he took his seat beside Tim. Tim didn't notice this because, again, he had his earphones or his headphones on and was listening to music. It was unclear exactly how much time passed between Vince taking his new seat and the start of the events that unfolded next, but it was somewhere between 10 and 30 minutes, according to eyewitness statements. 10 to 30 minutes after Vince Lee sat down beside Tim McLean on the back of that Greyhound bus, passengers recalled hearing a blood-curdling scream. This grabbed their attention and prompted them to all look towards the back of the bus. However, nothing could have prepared them for what was unfolding in front of them. Vince, holding a large hunting knife, had began to stab Tim repeatedly in his neck and chest, over and over and over again. While he was doing so, he was expressionless. The passengers described him as being almost robotic in his actions, and he was emotionless as he stabbed Tim McLean over and over again. Tim tried to stop him and tried to fight back, but it was to no avail. Witnessing this, the driver of the bus at the time immediately pulled to the side of the road, and all of the passengers left the bus in a state of panic, leaving just Tim and Vince on board at this point. It was at this point that Lee realized that the bus had been evacuated, and he also tried to exit the bus with his hunting knife in hand, but the door was barricaded by the bus driver and other passengers in an attempt to keep everyone else safe. Lee, realizing that he was stuck on the bus, would return to stabbing Tim. Emergency services were called, and the bus driver, a man by the name of Bruce Martin, and 2 other passengers attempted to board the bus to try and plead with Mr. Lee to stop stabbing Tim and possibly save him. But by this point, once they looked at the lifeless body, they could tell that he was gone, and so they exited the bus and once again barricaded the doors. Another Greyhound bus, which had been traveling closely behind bus 1170 on the same route, would also pull off the road in front of bus 1170. The driver, a man by the name of Bernie Syrup, would attempt to board the bus shortly afterwards to try to plead with Mr. Lee to stop what he was doing. However, Vince would stop hacking at Tim's neck only long enough to mutter the words, "Get emergency." It was at this point that both drivers acknowledged that there was something clearly wrong with Mr. Lee, and that the next course of action would be to keep the remaining passengers safe. Vince would then once again try to exit the bus, this time carrying Vince's newly decapitated head in one hand, covered in blood, and his hunting knife in the other. A trucker by the name of Chris Alguire, who was driving and saw both buses on the side of the road as well as the passengers, pulled over and, upon arrival, heard of the stabbing from the other passengers. So, armed with a crowbar and a hammer, he would bolt the door shut, further reinforcing the barricade in order to prevent Mr. Lee's escape. Scared that Lee would try and drive away, Bruce, the original bus driver, rendered the bus inoperable, leaving him and the rest of the passengers to watch Lee in horror. Lee then held up Tim's head as if to put it on display to all the passengers, who could do nothing but watch helplessly, and would continue to mutilate Tim's body in full view of the passengers and drivers as if he was putting on a show, for the next 3 hours. He was observed to be cutting the arms and legs off of Tim's body, as well as removing his entrails, his eyes, ears, tongue, and various other body parts and organs. He removed them from the body and held them up to the windows one by one to show off. He would occasionally remove organs from his body, smell them, and then consume them in full view of the passengers outside. While the RCMP, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, had shown up at around 8 p.m. after receiving reports of a stabbing, they had unsuccessfully tried to get Mr. Lee off of the bus, as he refused to cooperate and was seen parading Tim's head up and down the bus aisle, pacing back and forth for several minutes at a time. The RCMP would then summon special negotiators and tactical units for help in order to get Lee off the bus, but all their efforts proved futile, and Mr. Lee would continue to defile the corpse for 3 more hours. The passengers, who had been witness to these gruesome events, were eventually taken to be interviewed and given alleged compensation and hotel rooms to stay in, while Mr. Lee continued his assault on Tim's corpse. Hours later, at 1:30 a.m. on July 31st, 2008, Vince Lee would break one of the rear bus windows in an attempt to escape, but was promptly tased twice. He was handcuffed and placed in the back of a police cruiser, finally bringing this horrific ordeal to an end. The police would then search both Mr. Lee and the bus, and they would discover just truly how gruesome the extent of his crimes were. In Mr. Lee's pockets were the victim's ears, nose, and tongue. Meanwhile, on the bus they found several plastic bags containing various pieces of flesh and organs from Tim within them. However, parts of Tim's heart and his eyes were never recovered, and as such, were presumed to be eaten by Mr. Lee. The passengers that were on board that ill-fated bus were taken to local stores to have their personal belongings and luggage replaced, as most of their items had been covered in blood, and as such, had to remain as part of the crime scene. They were also later taken to Winnipeg to be reunited with their families. Now on to the trial of Vince Lee. On March 3rd, 2009, Lee's trial officially began, and he pleaded not criminally responsible on account of mental disorder, which in the U.S. is the insanity plea. It's the same thing, just for Canada. This would ultimately mean that although he accepted that that the incident did take place, that he did the things that he did on that bus, he accepted that, the defense would claim that the premeditation that would be necessary for a crime to be considered murder was not likely. This would have been due to his history of mental illness. Psychiatrists would go on to testify at Mr. Lee's trial that he was unaware of his actions in that moment, and that he had been having hallucinatory episodes, which led him to committing the heinous act that he did. The judge that presided over the trial, one Mr. John Scurfield, would accept the diagnosis of schizophrenia and rule in Mr. Lee's favor, saying that he was indeed not criminally responsible for the killing. He was ordered to be sent to a provincial psychiatric facility where he spent 7 years in treatment in the secure wing of that facility. In 2017, he received an absolute discharge and is, as such, not required to have yearly reviews or abide by any conditions. Therefore, he is a free man, walking the streets of Canada to this day. Well, since 2017. Following his release, he moved to Manitoba and changed his name to Will Lee Baker. Many passengers and the family of Tim McLean were obviously unsatisfied with this verdict and would bring numerous lawsuits against Greyhound, citing that they failed to keep passengers safe. None of these lawsuits, however, would materialize into much, and to this day, many of the witnesses from the incident have to live with crippling anxiety and PTSD, and have claimed that they failed to receive proper compensation after such a gruesome experience. For many of those passengers, it was life-changing, and they have been unable to return to the lives they had before the incident, and feel as if the government didn't do enough to actually help them. And I agree. There's not a lot of people who could see that kind of absolute mayhem, that carnage, someone's life being taken away in such a violent and unnecessary manner, and been completely okay with it. In fact, those are the people that you should probably stay away from. The people who can see that kind of thing and are okay with it. That would have ruined me. I know that much. I really hope I don't ever have to see anything like that. But they did. A large component of the case that Mr. Lee eventually won was the component of his mental health at the time. Mr. Lee's wife said that there were signs of his deteriorating mental health in the months leading up to the murder, and that while she tried to get him help, due to the stigma surrounding mental health in many Asian communities, Mr. Lee refused. Mr. Lee even had one psychiatric admission to a hospital prior to Tim McLean's murder, as he was found walking alongside the highway in Ontario in 2005. He was given a diagnosis of schizophrenia from medical professionals, and he was given medications. Doctors at the psychiatric facility believed that Mr. Lee was at risk of harming himself or others, and he was therefore placed on 2 involuntary admission certificates, and could have been legally detained for 14 days. He would leave the hospital after 10 days despite this, and he would allegedly be discharged against medical advice. According to Mr. Lee, he escaped. And once he returned to Winnipeg, he would not seek any further medical advice. This lends to the theory that had better precautions been taken, and Mr. Lee received the medical attention that he needed, Tim McLean's death may have been avoided. One last note of information. On December 21st, 2008, just months after Tim McLean's death, his roommate and childhood friend, my resources are not entirely clear on the state of their relationship. Her name was Colleen Yestrow, as she identified herself shortly after his passing, would go on to give birth to his first and only child. Because of a combination of reasons, mental health or lack thereof, in caring of mental health, that child was growing up without one of its parents. This is to say that mental health and taking care of your mental health, seeking the aid that you need and listening to the professionals. If they give you medication, you need to take it. Unless it doesn't work for you, you can talk to them. They're professionals, they'll be willing to work something out and find you the help that really helps you. But because none of that happened, a child is growing up without a father, a roommate / childhood friend / lover is now loverless or friendless or roommateless, and Mr. McLean's parents are childless now. This all could have been avoided through proper care, and that's tragic that none of this had to happen. So, everyone, please take care of your mental health. It's one of the most important things aside from your physical health, obviously, but I'd say that they're just about the same. The same way that you cannot function with a broken leg is the same way that you might not be able to function with a broken mind. With that said, I'd like to say rest in peace, Timothy McLean Jr. And thank you for watching.